We have exciting news. Ryan and Emma are moving in with us until they save enough to buy a house.
I was confused. Our house wasn't that big. Where are they going to stay?
In your room, of course.
My room? Where am I supposed to go?
You're old enough to take care of yourself. It's time for you to find your own place.
It's not like we're kicking you out. We're just making space for Ryan and Emma. You can stay with a friend or find a small apartment. You'll figure it out.
They said it so casually, as if they hadn't just shattered what little stability I had. I was barely out of college, working a part-time job while trying to land something full-time. I didn't have savings or anywhere else to go. I can't afford to live on my own right now.
You'll manage. You're a woman after all. Men would be willing to take you in.
Ryan and Emma need the space more than you do. He's starting a family. You're practically useless here.
All I was to them was a useless child, someone they could discard when I wasn't convenient anymore. I wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair it was, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I've known since I was little that my parents didn't want a daughter. It wasn't something they said outright, but their actions were loud enough. My older brother Ryan was their pride and joy, the son who could do no wrong, the one who carried the family name. I was just an afterthought, a placeholder, until they could have more boys. Only they never did. After me, my mother couldn't have any more children. It was a source of disappointment for them, though they never admitted it in words. Instead, they made it clear in the way they treated Ryan like a king, and me like a burden. When Ryan got good grades, they threw him parties. Guests would fill our house, congratulating him and gushing over his future. My parents will buy him whatever he wants as a gift. I'd sit quietly in a corner, trying not to feel invisible. When I got good grades, they barely acknowledged it. My report cards were glanced at and tossed aside. There was never money for me. If I asked for school supplies, I was accused of being wasteful. If I mentioned a field trip, I was reminded how tight finances were. Money was never tight when it came to Ryan, though. They bought him a car when he turned 18. The day he got it, my parents threw another party. I didn't even get a cake on my birthday that year. My existence seemed to irritate them, like I was a constant reminder of something they didn't want. One summer, when I was about 10, they decided they'd had enough of me. They sent me to live with my Uncle Peter and his wife, Martha. The excuse was that I'd have more space there and wouldn't feel left out, while they focused on Ryan's college prep. I knew better than to argue. What was the point? They wanted me gone, and I didn't have a say in the matter. Not living with Uncle Peter and Aunt Martha was worse than I could have imagined. They had 3 kids of their own, and I was treated like an unpaid servant. I cleaned, cooked, and ran errands while their children did whatever they pleased. If I made a mistake, the punishments were severe. I remember one day vividly. Aunt Martha asked me to wash the dishes after dinner. I was careful, but one of the glasses slipped from my soapy hands and shattered on the floor.
Look what you've done, you clumsy brat.
She slapped me across the face so hard I saw stars. When Uncle Peter came into the kitchen and saw the broken glass, he joined in, grabbing a wooden spoon and hitting me until my arms were covered in welts. I thought I was going to die that night. My cries must have carried through the walls because the next morning, a neighbor came over. She'd heard everything and threatened to call the police if they didn't stop. The neighbor must have told my parents because a few days later, they came to take me back home. My mother was furious, not at Uncle Peter and Aunt Martha for what they'd done, but at me for causing trouble.
We sent you there to make things easier for everyone, Amy. Can't you do anything right?
I didn't answer. What was the point? My silence only seemed to confirm their low opinion of me. Back at home, nothing changed. Ryan continued to be the golden boy, and I remained the unwanted daughter. My parents did their best to pretend the incident with Uncle Peter never happened. They didn't even ask if I was okay.
Just focus on school and stay out of trouble.
Trouble, in their eyes, was anything that diverted attention from Ryan. When he got a scholarship to a prestigious university, they were ecstatic. My father invited his co-workers over for a celebratory dinner, boasting about Ryan's future.
This is what hard work and good parenting can achieve. Ryan's going to make us proud.
I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, listening to them talk about him as if he were the only child they had. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Over the years, I learned to stop hoping for their approval. I stopped asking for anything, stopped trying to please them. But no matter how small I made myself, their resentment lingered. Even the smallest joys in my life were met with disapproval. Once, I saved up for months to buy a new pair of sneakers. They weren't fancy, just something decent to replace the worn-out shoes I'd been wearing for years. When my mother saw them, she shook her head in disgust.
Why would you waste money on that? You should have saved it for something important.
Ryan, meanwhile, had just come home with a brand new gaming console, a gift from my father for staying focused on his goals. And I couldn't help but wonder what my life would have been like if I'd been born a boy. I wondered if they'd have treated me differently or tried to move me. The day Ryan left for college was bittersweet. On one hand, the house felt quieter without him there. On the other hand, my parents' attention shifted to me, but not in the way I'd hoped. They didn't suddenly become loving or supportive. If anything, they seemed to resent my presence even more, as if I were a reminder of what they'd lost now that Ryan was gone.
Don't expect things to change, Amy. We still have high expectations for this family.
It was laughable, really. Their expectations had never included me, and I knew they never would. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I worked hard, got into college on a scholarship, and managed to stay out of their way. But things changed the day Ryan announced he was getting married. His fiancée Emma was beautiful, kind, and everything my parents dreamed of in a daughter-in-law. They welcomed her with open arms, treating her like she was already part of the family. For a while, I thought maybe her presence would soften them toward me, but I was wrong. One evening, they called me into the living room. Ryan and Emma were sitting on the couch, smiling like they had some big secret.
We have exciting news. Ryan and Emma are moving in with us until they save enough to buy a house.
I was confused. Our house wasn't that big. Where are they going to stay?
In your room, of course.
My room? Where am I supposed to go?
You're old enough to take care of yourself. It's time for you to find your own place.
It's not like we're kicking you out. We're just making space for Ryan and Emma. You can stay with a friend or find a small apartment. You'll figure it out.
They said it so casually, as if they hadn't just shattered what little stability I had. I was barely out of college, working a part-time job while trying to land something full-time. I didn't have savings or anywhere else to go. I can't afford to live on my own right now.
You'll manage. You're a woman after all. Men would be willing to take you in.
Ryan and Emma need the space more than you do. He's starting a family. You're practically useless here.
All I was to them was a useless child, someone they could discard when I wasn't convenient anymore. I wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair it was, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. In their eyes, Ryan was the golden child, and I was nothing. So, I packed my things. I didn't have much, just a suitcase of clothes, a few books, and some photos I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I carried my bag out the door, Ryan and Emma were already moving their things into my room. My parents didn't even say goodbye. The first few weeks were a blur of couch surfing and late nights at work. I stayed with a friend for a while, but I knew I couldn't be there forever. Eventually, I found a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. Meanwhile, Ryan and Emma settled into my old room, and my parents continued to dote on them. They threw an engagement party at the house, inviting all their friends and relatives. I wasn't even invited. I saw pictures of the event on social media, my mother beaming as she held Emma's hand, my father clapping Ryan on the back like he was the greatest man alive. Not once did they think to call me or ask how I was doing. It hurt, but it also made me stronger. I threw myself into work, taking on extra shifts and saving every penny I could. I refused to let their rejection define me. A year passed, and I built a life for myself. I got a better job, made new friends, and even started taking night classes to improve my skills. For the first time, I felt like I was living for myself, not trying to earn my parents' approval. I didn't hear anything about my family until one day I saw it on TV. Ryan's mugshot was everywhere. He had been arrested for a massive fraud scandal. I was shocked. Apparently, he went into business, but it was a front for illegal activities. Embezzlement, money laundering, tax evasion, you name it, he was involved. The authorities had been building a case against him for months. When they finally arrested him, they found enough evidence to bury him in court. The story spread like wildfire. News channels replayed footage of Ryan being escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Emma sobbing behind him. Social media was relentless, with people tearing into him, and, more interestingly, into my parents. Apparently, my father had co-signed some of Ryan's loans, and my mother had been boasting about his success to anyone who would listen. The public, armed with receipts of their involvement, turned on them too. Bad comments flooded every platform. For once, I wasn't invisible. People started connecting the dots, mentioning me in posts. Some even reached out to ask if I was okay. It was surreal. Days later, my mother called me, but I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later, and I was shocked to hear her begging me for money. The bail for Ryan was more than they could afford, and they needed help. I couldn't believe my ears. They hadn't cared when I was struggling to pay rent or when I barely had enough to eat. Now they wanted my help? She kept calling until I picked up.
Anna, we're desperate. We've sold everything we can, but it's not enough. We need your help.
My help? That's funny coming from you. When I needed help, you threw me out like garbage. Now that your golden boy is in jail, I'm supposed to bail you out?
Please, Anna, we're sorry for everything. We'll make it up to you. Just help us save your brother.
No thanks. Ryan can rot for all I care. And you? You can live with the consequences of your choices. Isn't this what you wanted? To prioritize Ryan over everything else? Enjoy the rewards. I hung up, but the calls didn't stop. My father even tried visiting my apartment, pounding on my door and shouting for me to open up. I called the police and filed for a restraining order. That seemed to finally shut them up for a while. One evening, as I was scrolling through my feed, a breaking news story caught my eye. Emma had disappeared. Reports claimed she'd taken the last of my parents' money. The small amount they'd scraped together for Ryan's legal fees. She'd stolen all and vanished without a trace. My parents were left destitute, unable to pay for Ryan's bail or his mounting legal fees. The house they'd lavished so much attention on was repossessed. Their cars, their savings, everything was gone. Ryan stayed in jail, awaiting trial. His public defender didn't stand a chance against the mountain of evidence. Eventually, he was given a life imprisonment with no chance for bail or fine. Months later, I saw my parents again. They were sitting among some homeless people, looking worn out and haggard. They were back to eating from hand to mouth. I went to them and made sure they saw me. Right before their eyes, I distributed money to all the homeless people there, but I gave them nothing. They burst into tears and began begging for my forgiveness, but I pushed them off and walked away. They didn't deserve my forgiveness. Not then, not ever. A few months later, I heard my mom was very sick and had been diagnosed with cancer. My dad kept calling me, but I never answered. I really don't care if she lives or dies. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.